Assalamu alaikum, good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Classics Show. I am your host, Shabnum, Riaz. As always, this is one of my favorite times of the week when we can sit down and talk about literature, talk about the arts, talk about the classics, talk about anything, all those wonderful things that come together that really fine-tune your life. And it's wonderful to reconnect with that sort of, I would say is food for the soul. So today we are going to talk about Anna Akhmatova. And Anna Akhmatova was born Anna Andreevna Gorenko. She was a Russian modernist poet and one of the most acclaimed writers of the Russian canon. She was born in 1889, and as I said, she was one of the greatest poets of Russian literature. Her work has a classical elegance, and she came to the forefront there as a female Russian writer of her time, writing at a very difficult time as well. So to talk about today's subject, we have with us in our studios our guest, Ramsha Ashraf. Ramsha, who is a poet, an educationist, who is also going to attend the IWP International Writers Program. Ramsha, thank you very much for being with us here today.
Hello, and thank you so very much for inviting me over.
It's our pleasure. Okay, Ramsha, when you're talking about, as today we are talking about Anna Akhmatova and, the great presence that she had in Russian literature at a time when Russia was going through turmoil, and she identified with the sufferings of the people, and she suffered so much in her own life as well. Her life had been sort of described by some people as noble beauty, but at the same time with a lot of catastrophe in her life. So can you just sort of take us through the early years of, she was born into an aristocratic family but then changed her name. How did she become who she was?
So basically what you're asking is that I should highlight how did Anna Akhmatova became Anna Akhmatova.
Yes.
Because she was born, as you have just mentioned, that she was born Anna Andreevna Gorenko, and she was born to this naval officer and his wife in 1889, June 1889. And while mentioning dates, because we are going to discuss her work as well, mentioning dates, we need to keep this thing in our mind that prior to 1819 in Russia, this was Julian calendar that was being followed or referred to, rather than Georgian calendar that was being referred to in the West. So she was born on 11th June 1889 to this naval officer, and she was named Anna Andreevna Gorenko. So as she was growing up, she was, I guess, 13 years old, and she was already writing poems for 2 years. She started writing poetry at the age of 11.
Yeah.
Yes. So she was writing poetry already for 2 years. So one day when her father got this, her father's attention was alarmed that my daughter is going to, or aspiring to be recognized as a poet in the society. So he warned the daughter that don't bring shame upon my name.
Right.
So Anna Akhmatova replied to that I don't need your name.
And she took her grandmother's name.
Yes, that was the prompt reply, and she disowned the entire paternal lineage of her father, or entire paternal side of her lineage. So what she did instead, and that's quite interesting, that she opted for the maiden name of one of her grandmother or one of her women ancestor, and that was Akhmatova. So Anna Andreevna Gorenko transformed into Anna Akhmatova at the age of 13. That was quite young.
Tender age to have that, to have sort of a strong personality at that age, to be taken, so because the age of 13 and that adolescent time is when a person is going through so much internal turmoil anyway. So to have to make such a decision says a lot about her personality.
So yes, it is significant in two ways. First, that of course it is, an act of defiance or an act of rebellion that you see, I do not want the identity you have given me. I'm going to to identify myself, or I'm going to, name the self I have, or I feel, or I can relate with inside myself. But at the same time, what Joseph Brodsky says, he says that that was the first moment when Anna Akhmatova wrote her first poem. Her choice of choosing her own name, her choice of choosing this maiden's name, or her choice of going for a women's name, that is the point where she shows that she's going to take a stand on, a women's hand.
She's going to give a voice to them.
Yes, she's going to be the mouthpiece for all women. At the same time, second significance which we have, that somehow, because we all, the ones who know about literature and who read literature, can relate to what I'm going to elaborate. Somehow this renaming process indicates the rebirth or rejuvenation that was given from Anna Andreevna Gorenko's body, the physical being. But there was another virtual birth that was given to Anna Akhmatova.
So here was her being born into this aristocratic family and everything, and then all of a sudden, at the age of 13, she renounces it all.
So in a way that she gives it up, the entire aristocratic status. And for that, we need to know, about her girlhood recollection, or about her childhood. She was born in Odessa on the Black Sea, but when she was 2 years old, the entire family moved to this small but grandiose village, Sarsky Selo, if I'm not wrong. And Sarsky Selo had a great historic significance. Nowadays it is called Pushkin, but at that time it was considered Tsar's village. So it has that historical affiliation, and also it was a few miles away from the capital, St. Petersburg, and it was controlled by Catherine's palace. And also one thing that is significant, it was built by Peter, the great daughter Elizabeth. So that was an answer, a Russian Baroque answer to Versailles, to that French, side of tradition. So it had that significance in its own. When she recollects her girlhood memories, like aristocratic memoirs, she does not, elaborate her own experiences, or her subjective view, or her subjective tone is not there. This is the world outside which she characterizes. The scene outside her bedroom window, the way rain used to be there, the way train used to pass, that that was there outside her bedroom window. So it is more about the world outside, through which we get to know that it was an aristocratic family or aristocratic traditions that she was groomed into.
And her strength was being able to identify at every level, which made her so
This is very interesting that from the very beginning we can see this classicist observer's eye in Anna Akhmatova's poetry, and at the same time we see this tinge of modern literature which is also present in that. And when we talk about that classicist observer's eyes, that is where she focuses more on the world outside when she tries to describe the scene, or as we see in Dostoevsky or Tolstoy, or maybe her all-time favorite Pushkin. So, but at the same time, she was the one who incorporated this element of being, someone whose self is very significant, whose self is very important, and who's going to survive, let's say, a consuming drama. So that sense is there from the very beginning, from the earliest till the last poem we read from Anna Akhmatova. One more thing which I would like to add here, that her childhood collections show her as someone who's always very rebellious and who's always very clear. There is this her in her biographies, there is this event where biographers relate to this point that the entire family went to the Black Sea to spend their summers. And unlike, the traditional women, she was lurking around, hatless, and that times women had real obsession with overclothing and covering themselves.
Modesty.
So she was wearing hatless.
She was already breaking away at that time.
The exact words which critics use as that sunburned, hatless, and swimming like a fish. So she was doing all that during that time. And one of her aunts, she was really irritated, and she commented that, you see, if I were your mama, I were crying all the time. And look at the reply. She said that, you see, it is a relief for both of us that you're not my mama.
That's really
that's really giving up the name. And
she was very witty at that time as well.
Very clear, in fact, that this is what I want to do and this is what I should be, given the liberty to do. And one more thing, another genius of her age.
We'll get back to that. We're going to take a break right now, and then so stay tuned and don't change the channel. Welcome back. Well, today we're talking about Anna Akhmatova, a very, very, well-known, one of the greatest poets of Russian literature. And Ramsha, before we went to the break, we were talking about Anna, her childhood, how she changed her identity in a sense by changing her name and also her rebirth as well.
Yeah. So, yes, I was saying that it is a kind of rebirth or, revival or rejuvenation, which takes place from this already physical being, which is there. So it is a kind of virtual rebirth, and which, Marina Tsvetiva, another great poet, contemporary to Anna Akhmatova, she describes it that Akhmatova, the name is a great sigh, falling into the depth without a name, an abyss, where you are there, the self is there. But the traditional, the practices, the norms, the customs, the familial lineage, all of that is left behind. And the person is there to recognize, to identify the self, the only self that person is left with. So Akhmatova took the start from that point, abandoning all that aristocratic demeanor.
All that baggage that she had.
Yes, the baggage.
Which she was viewing as.
Which actually became a part of herself when she was Anna Andreevna Gurenko, because the father was naval officer, and it used to be considered an absurd thing for a woman to become a poetry or to do poetry.
As her father had said, you're bringing shame to the family.
You are going to bring shame upon my name. And she said that I don't need your name, just, flaunt your name around. I don't need it. So she had that beginning. Even when she was 13 and when she was supposed to, have that social setup around, already have social setup around, she took it to the point zero. So that in a way shows, as I talked about it earlier, that shows two things that remain significant. The first poem, as I referred to Joseph Brodsky, that was the point when she knew that, okay, poetry is something that I'm going to spare my life for. And poetry is something that I'm not going to listen to anyone, be it my father, be it my father's will, be it anyone in the society who's going to, cage me in their perspective or in their viewpoint.
We'll get back to that, Ramsha. We're just going for a quick break. Stay with us.
Requiem by Anna Akhmatova. Not under foreign skies, nor under foreign wings protected. I shared all this with my own people, there where misfortune had abandoned us. 1961. During the frightening years of the Azov terror, I spent 17 months waiting in prison queues in Leningrad. One day, somehow, someone picked me out. On that occasion, there was a woman standing behind me, her lips blue with cold, who, of course, had never in her life heard my name. She said into my ear, because everyone whispered there, "Could one ever describe this?" And I answered, "I can." It was then that something like a smile slid across what had previously been just a face. 1st of April in the year 1957, Leningrad. Dedication. Mountains fall before this grief. A mighty river stops its flow, but prison doors stay firmly bolted, shutting off the convict burrows, and an anguish close to death. Fresh winds softly blow for someone. Gentle sunsets warm them through. We don't know this. We are everywhere the same, listening to the scrape and turn of hateful keys, and the heavy tread of marching soldiers, waking early, as if for early mass. Walking through the capital run wild, gone to seed, we'd meet the dead, lifeless.
Welcome back. Ramsha, we were talking about Anna Akhmatova and how, she was at a very young age being able to define her life path at just the tender age of 13. Now, she'd been writing and everything. Tell us how she was introduced into the literary circles, and also her relationship, how, with her husband, and how she found him at that time, and their interaction and his influence on her writing as well.
All right. I'm glad that you have mentioned her husband, because interestingly, it was Nikolai Gumilov. Before becoming her first husband, he was her friend, and he was introduced to her to Akhmatova's sister. She knew the family before. So it was Nikolai Gumilov who introduced her into different literary circles. But before that, her introduction into different literary circles, it is very interesting that Gumilov was writing poetry for Akhmatova throughout. And they met in 1903 again because of Akhmatova's sister. And Akhmatova kept refusing to Gumilov's marriage proposal until they got married in 1912, April 1st, 1912.
And she also had a very interesting way that she put forward her relationship, that maybe this is the man I'm destined to marry. Maybe he's the one I'm in love with.
Yeah, because at that point, when for the first time Gumilov proposed Akhmatova, she was having, I don't know if it was a proper affair or not, but she had this feeling or a soft corner for her brother-in-law, because at that time her sister died. So she used to write to her brother-in-law that maybe I'm destined to marry Gumilov because I feel that I'm fated to marry him because you're not responding, and the kind of despair we see in her poetry, that could be seen in those letters as well. But at the same time, she was quite determined in her refusals as well, because for 9 years she kept refusing Gumilov. And in that period, for those 9 years, Gumilov kept writing. Gumilov dedicated 2 collections of poetry to Akhmatova. And Gumilov was so afraid of sending the work to Akhmatova that he had sent a copy to Akhmatova's father, but did not send anything to Akhmatova, whom he had dedicated that, collection of poetry. So that was quite quite a transitional relationship they had. But interestingly, it was Nikolai Gumilov who introduced Akhmatova to different literary circles, and it was with him that she started working on different literary journals, and they started a movement also, which was, you know, corresponding with imagism, and that was a response. So that was entire symbolist movement, and that was called Akhmaism.
Yeah.
Yes. So their stance was that we need to use, you know, concrete images. We need to convey a more sensible, or more sensible way of, you know, imagist poetry, because Ezra Pound was writing at that time in Europe, and that was an answer to Charles Baudelaire's the technical poetry, symbolist movement. So they started doing work together, and it was Gumilov who initiated Akhmatova's, you know, creative spirit. Not initiated because she was writing before, but
Gave it
was,
direction.
yes, in fact, projected it in you know, a more cultural or social dimension, because women were not allowed to share their poetry or their work in literary circles. They were allowed to be a part of that literary circle, but they were not allowed to share the poetry. So it was Gumilov who introduced her and in that literary circle, and it was in 1912 that she, maybe at the age of 19 or 20, she got her first work published, named as Evening.
And that was from the, it was the Guild of Poets that they had formed that published that.
So, and again, she was a part of that platform. So, yes, somehow Gumilov, if not influenced her work, because Gumilov was quite, you know, quite patriotic poet and had quite traditional ideas and had shown quite traditional side of poetry. But Akhmatova was kind of a rebellious spirit, which could be seen in her poetry as well.
And also something very interesting about her first publication, Evening, is that she was very, very selective with her work. She had 200 poems and chose just 35.
Yes, that's, you know, that shows that how a perfectionist or how meticulous she was in choosing her work. She had chosen only 35 poems out of 200 poems which she had written, which she started writing from when she was even 11 years old. So yes, it shows that how meticulous she was and how clear she was. Again, we can relate to that rebirth and revival phenomenon.
What you're mentioning, the clear-mindedness at such a young age.
And also that she did not change her style from, you know, taking influence or borrowing influence from her husband. As we discussed in Sylvia Plath's poetry, that she may want to borrow a few things from Ted Hughes, but in Akhmatova's poetry we see that individual sensibility. Although we see that she is somehow influenced from Pushkin, and she takes you know, ideas or inspirations from traditional classicist poets or even from imagist poets, because they started working on that movement, Akhmaism, which was in correspondence with imagism. So she does that, but we do not see that kind of familial influence, because my husband is doing that, so I should be doing that. No, she
was the least impressionable.
Yeah, but I guess the credit also goes to Nikolai Gumilov, because he did not influence, he did not try to, or he did not endeavor to influence her in a way that you know, she is my wife and she should be doing it in a certain way. He did not do that. In fact, he was the one who published her poetry in a literary journal he was handling and publishing or editing at that time in 1907. And that was the first time Akhmatova's poetry was published.
Okay, now a bit more about their relationship. He wooed her for 9 years and then they got married. And then where did the relationship go and what effect did that have on her writing?
All right, that's quite interesting, because Nikolai Gumilov was persistent and he was determined like anything, and he wanted Akhmatova as his wife. He kept insisting, and Akhmatova finally said yes, and the marriage took place. But after, there are, transitional periods or phases they have after their marriage. They went to Paris for their honeymoon, and this was the first time ever Akhmatova saw a world outside from Russia. But she was fluent in French, as you can expect a girl from aristocratic family. But she saw the world with Nikolai Gumilev. But after those transitional periods, when her first son was born, in fact, that was the only son they have had, Lev. After Lev's birth, they kind of became more of colleagues rather than husband or wife relationship. And Gumilev started an affair with another actress, and he had another, son. And Akhmatova, what I have known and what I have read from, what I have gathered from her biographies, she did not retaliate or she did not rebel the way we see traditional women whining about their lovers or husbands going away. She was quite, she was quite she understood that maybe this is the limitation of our relationship, and he wants to go away. And at the same time, she was having multiple affairs at that time. So she did not encapsulate the entire relationship in one, cage or one point or one age or one direction. So maybe this is why we see that the poetry or the creative work flows on. It does not stop at one point, the way we see in other women poets, most oftenly in other women poets, not all the time, because it's not kind of an absolute. So yes, the relationship was quite dynamic, but there were other men who
in her
also,
life that influenced her as well. Okay, so when we talk about her style, that was characterized by, in the beginning it was the romantic element, then it was characterized by the economic conditions, and also it was strikingly original. So her coming to the forefront, writing in a way that was different, and especially coming from a woman. Tell us about that.
Yeah, as I just mentioned, because in the beginning, she could not cut herself off from that traditional aristocratic voice she owned. You see, cutting the poet self off and focusing much more on the external details. We see that in Akhmatova's poetry, but at the same time, what we cannot neglect is, that modernity or modern balance, modern literature's balance. Not that modern literature has balance, but the balance we see in Akhmatova's poetry between classical and modern voices. How Akhmatova views the world outside. If we can refer Requiem here, we see that she becomes a mouthpiece, or she becomes a voice for the unheard voices,
for
all
suffering and the misery,
for the ones who have suffered, for all women. But at the same time, we see that she does not ignore that persona, which is I. So that I is quite explicit in her opinion, in her voice. But at the same time, this is, this is the technique, this is the amazing technique which makes her more universal or more relatable, I would say. That you do not see that distinction between, or that alienation between classical or modern world. She balances it somehow, and she blurs the boundaries between a modern and classical world.
So do you think that it gave her more of a humanistic effect to be able to reach out to all her readers in that way?
It does, because again, we were, going to talk about Requiem, and we had planned the entire discussion on Requiem. So if you see Requiem and what she gives instead of a preface, again, I should introduce Requiem. Requiem is a large work which includes almost 19 fragments, and in that work, Requiem, we have 10 numbered poems in which only 3 are titles and the remaining remain untitled. And we have one prologue, preface, and we have one introduction and dedication. And then the poem is, a poem is concluded by this two part of epilogues. So when we see Requiem, and when we see how a woman identifies another woman and how it becomes, that humanistic stimuli, how it becomes that humanistic stimuli for the poet or for the other woman to write Requiem, we just cannot let this fact pass by, that she has that humanistic, eye available to her. And another thing, even the poem Without a Hero, if we see the poem Without a Hero, we can witness different places where she is talking about that humanistic stance. At the same time, Shabnum, I must say, because we could not cater to the entire life or the entire work she produced in her life in one program, we just cannot sum it up, because it has so many historical,
so many dimensions.
Yes, historical events attached to it. It has so many, literary movements attached to it, the literary phases that kept changing and transforming the personality, the persona poet has. And then the kind of ban or the kind of restrictions she had underwent in her life. We just cannot encompass all that in one program, but I would suggest, or I would say, that whenever we read these poems or whenever we refer to her work, we need to, or we should look at the historical or the
circumstances. Because she had to write Requiem in secret, and she would carry it around with her as well, and for many, many, many years it remained unpublished.
So when we talk about Requiem, it's very interesting that when we talk about Requiem, war literature is quite pertinent. How? That it has that characteristic of testimony and then memory as well. As you have just mentioned, that it was not allowed to publish anything to Anna Akhmatova for many decades. For almost 4 decades, she remained there, and her work was suppressed. Her manuscripts were burned, and she remained underground. And it was this day, it was in fact the 1st of April in 1957, when a woman recognized this woman as poet. And she said that, can you describe this? And she said, yes, I can. And even that woman did not know this woman's or the poet's name. She requested, and Anna Akhmatova started rewriting, or started writing about the war terror, or Yazov terror, as it is mentioned in Requiem again. So from 1930s or 19-something, it remained in her mind until 1957, when she wrote the preface, or when she, when she had that chance to get the work published. So it remained in her memory. War literature is pertinent in the sense because she is serving 2 purposes. One, the witness. Second, she is reporting whatever she witnessed. So she is the reporter, she is the witness. So whenever we read her work, particularly Requiem, We need to have all those aspects in our mind. Whatever was happening in 1957, what was Years of Terror, what was happening in 1961, why they banned Akhmatova's work, and why was it so that she was only allowed to publish 19 essays on Pushkin and not anything. Maybe that was her voice that you know, that shoot them off. That what's going on? This is not the real Russia. Come on, what are you doing to us?
And it's also very important to note that even, you know, she decided to remain in Russia and did not leave the country, even though she faced you know, all this censoring on her publications, and also the fear of the arrest of her son as well. So she was living in constant, she was living in a very tough time as well, when it was hard to make ends meet, but she remained there.
I guess that is what separates her from Nikolai Gumilov. Gumilov wanted to go and join and fight on the front. And she wanted to stay back, and she wanted to write against war, and she wanted to, you know, with a very clear perspective, she wanted to portray what she felt. And yes, when we talk about her son, again, a very important detail in her life, because when her son was imprisoned or maybe sentenced to death, because she did not know when they stood you know, in front of that prison gate in Leningrad, which was actually St. Petersburg, the old St. Petersburg, and it was changed or transformed into Leningrad. So when they were standing outside that prison gate, they stood there, I'm sorry, they stood there for 17 months. Every single day, the women made queues outside that prison gate for 17 months with little notes or letters in their hands, waiting for their loved ones, waiting for their husbands, sons, or maybe, you know, fathers or brothers outside that gate. She did not hear, there was no acknowledgement from within inside. So that very point, when she already had lost her first husband, Nikolai Gumilov, and was living with the third husband, although she had, you know, that kind of intimacy with the first one, because he remained a colleague and he remained quite a literary friend till the end. So that was actually the point where she realized the helplessness of the ones who suffered. And that was the point when
she became the best
actually that was
then.
the point when the woman recognized, and woman requested that, can you describe this? And she said, yes, I can. And she took up the task, and she started, you know, making those manuscripts, memorizing them, and then reading back and forth in front of her friend. And then they used to burn the manuscript, and it remained in her memory.
Many of those works were just, you know, in just recitation, where she would just speak them, and they were not written down.
They were not written down because the terror, the Years of Terror, was so strong that they're going to catch whatever we are doing, then they're going to burn the manuscript in any way. So the better way out, and you know, if you have watched that movie, I'm forgetting that name. There is another Italian movie, and that is based on Italian Revolution, and it's Train to some place. There is a city in Italy, and the very similar kind of thing is shown in that movie, that there is a woman who, you know, keeps memorizing different contact addresses, because there is this fear, once we are caught, we are going to, you know, leave everything here, whatever is written on the paper. So they keep memorizing those numbers. And same happened with Akhmatova, that she kept memorizing those
So
verses.
quite a few works must have been lost in this way as well.
I guess that yes, there is a possibility that work was either lost or was evolved or was transformed or was edited in that process of memorizing, because every time you memorize, you either lose something or you add something. So every time a new poem was written, you know, in her mind. So yes, it shows that that significant effect of memory being involved in requiem. But at the same time, whatever was produced came down to us in transliterated form. That is again a question mark if it is translated in its original sense, because it was written under lyric poetry. So if it catches the lyric Akhmatova produced, because in what I use is Thomas's translation, if it is the right kind of transliteration we are utilizing or not, if we are getting the essence of the poetry or not, that is a separate question. But at the same time, about memory, that is right. Maybe something was added, maybe something was subtracted, or you know, there were different dimensions of that kind of work.
So she was, you know, as you said, she was experiencing all these things firsthand as well. And the women there were looking towards her for her to express their feelings as well. So she was in fact becoming their mouthpiece for expressing their grief and the terror that they were living in on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's right, because in a requiem, particularly we are, you know, again narrowing our debate down to requiem, because that was the work that showed that woman's request to Akhmatova, and she started writing requiem in response to that woman's request. So when we see the preface, prologue, and dedication, and instead of a preface and then two epilogues, we see that her tone caters to all women. Her tone becomes a mouthpiece or a representative of all those women who once lost their either husband, son, father, brother, or the ones who disappeared, were dead, or you know, they were away, they were snatched away from them.
They were still in the process of mourning, but they hadn't had a chance to be able to express their grief.
Yeah, because again, in Requiem, she uses this religious, you know, vocabulary time and time again. There are images, yes, there are images where she relates herself with Mary Virgin, and then there are images where she relates her son with Jesus, and there are images where she relates that gate, which is there and which is not going to, you know, answer with that cross. So, you know, the religious images, symbols, metaphors, they are there to represent that modern hollowness which a man or which a woman felt after World War or after these kind of regimes which she felt in Azov's terror. So yes, we see that she becomes a kind of relatable or she depicts a relatable scenario which could be seen. Even if you allow me, I want to read these lines.
Please.
Okay.
Yes.
So she says, this is again from Requiem, because we have narrowed our discussion down to Requiem. And instead of a preface, she says, during the frightening years of the years of terror, I spent 17 months waiting in prison queues. So 17 months she was there in prison queues in Leningrad, which is the old St. Petersburg, the capital. One day, somehow, someone picked me out. So someone picked her out, although she was this poet of, you know, she was quite a recognizable poet, but her work was suppressed, and her work, and she was put in that ban cage, so nobody recognizes her anymore. On that occasion, there was a woman standing behind me. Her lips blue with cold, because they are coming every day and they are there for 17 months, who of course had never in her life heard my name, snatched away from human identity, jolted out of the torpor characteristic of all of us. She said into my ear, everyone whispered there. No one was allowed to talk. Could one ever describe this? And I answered, I can. It was then that something like a smile slid across what had previously been just a face. So you see
strong emotion
despair,
there.
you see, you know,
The blurring away of a person's identity as well, because she's saying that we're
you
once
see
had been a face.
inhumanity, but with cold lips, blue lips. You see people talking in whispers, kind of. You know, they are standing outside the prison, but they feel that they are imprisoned and they cannot even whisper it away, whatever is in their heart. And then you see the idea that someone needs to shake it off. Could anyone ever describe this? And there comes your Masiha.
And there is that plea.
Yeah.
It's a plea, in other words.
There comes that person who says that, okay, fine, I have this beacon of hope for you, take it away. So I'm going to describe it.
I'm going to try and share your pain with other people.
This is where they begin.
Right.
And even...
That's what sets the ball rolling.
Yeah. So, and even in epilogue, and other than that, she keeps using the images from nature as well. You know, she said there are lines in dedication. Mountains fall before this grief, a mighty river stops its flow, but prison doors stay firmly bolted. Even nature is going to answer, but those doors are not going to answer, or those gates are not going to acknowledge. I was standing outside
That is phenomenal.
So that is unnatural. So she's
true.
condemning it. And when we, you know, after the entire cycle, when we reach epilogue, the same kind of imagery could be witnessed or could be read. The images that are taken from nature. So that is probably why they say that it is a cycle which she creates in Requiem.
Cyclic work. Ramsha, unfortunately, we've come.
I know.
We are out of time. I know you have had lots more to share with us, and it's really, really interesting topic. And thank you so much for spending time with us and being able to, you know, inform our viewers as well, and an insight into who exactly she was and what inspired her to write. So thank you so much for being.
Thank you, Shabnum. It is always a pleasure to be in conversation with you.
Likewise, likewise. Okay, so unfortunately we ran out of time, as we usually do in this program, and of course Anna Akhmatova is, of course, one of the greatest Russian poets. So to do justice to her in just one program, maybe we were being overambitious, but hope you listened to the program with interest, as I certainly did. Lots there to learn from, and as we always say at the end of the program, do pick up a book, do you know, reconnect with your literary side. If it's anything, just get back into the habit of book reading. So until next week, stay happy. Bye-bye.
Thank you.